welcome to Inside Microsoft Teams. I'm Derek Snyder. Back in March, we unveiled Microsoft 365 Copilot, your Copilot for work. It combines the power of large language models with your company data in the Microsoft Graph with deep integrations and apps that you use every day, like Outlook, Word, PowerPoint, and of course, Teams. We went to private preview with Copilot in Teams meetings, and then 2 months later, we announced that apps built for Teams and M365 platform could also become extensible with Copilot plugins. This week at Inspire, we are continuing our Copilot journey with the announcement of Copilot in Teams Chat and Copilot in Teams Phone. So today I'm joined by the PMs who are leading this work so we can all learn a little bit more. Alice, Ryan, and Wendy, welcome to Inside Microsoft Teams. Let's do a lightning round intro. Who are you and what is your focus? Why don't we start with you, Alice?
Thanks, Derek. Thank you for having me. I'm Alice Wu. I'm a principal product manager on Teams, focusing specifically on meetings.
Wendy, what about you?
I am Wendy Arnett. I'm product manager lead on the calling team in Teams. And my focus is really on core calling. At a high level, this includes things like call controls, routing, the call settings, and the calls app.
Awesome. And Ryan, what about you?
Hey, Derek, great to see you. Ryan Nadale, principal product manager on the Teams team, and I focus on the chat and channel side of things.
Awesome. So Alice, talking about Teams meetings for a minute, which is your area of focus, how does it help users run more effective meetings?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For Copilot meetings, our vision for it is really for it to be a string moderator that can be by your side for every single meeting. It's there to help you capture notes, help you figure out what decisions were made, even figuring out what the pros and cons are for the ideas discussed. So it's really there to help you with conversation.
And Ryan, we announced Teams Chat Copilot this week. What were the main ideas or use cases that you envisioned when designing that?
When I think about Copilot and chat, it's really about staying in the flow of work. Like I'm sure all of us experience, stepping away from your computer for a couple of minutes and you come back and there are like dozens of group chats and dozens of messages to read, and it's just so overwhelming. We really see Copilot and chat as the answer to that problem, to help you stay connected with your team, stay in the flow of work, and reduce that kind of anxiety we all get when you hear like those notifications going off that you can't keep up with.
And Wendy, obviously you've been working on calling for quite some time. Talk to me a little bit about what you had in mind as the specific target for Copilot in Teams calling. Do you think it's just the average information worker, or are there specific scenarios that you really were thinking about when you were building the Copilot capability into the calling experience?
Yeah, so for our VoIP customers, Copilot will be a similar experience to meetings. You'll get the set of features that work in the same way, summaries of key points, suggestions, prompts to recap the call so far, capture action items. But for our PSTN customers, which is our legacy way of communicating, I think what's so exciting is that we're now bringing this intelligence to help our customers be more engaged and be really focused on the conversation. So for our one-on-one or our group calls, no longer will we have to worry about capturing notes. You can just really focus on connecting with the person that you're talking with and listening to what they have to say. And really, when you think about the audience, it's for anybody who makes calls. So within your organization, outside partners maybe, but ultimately we're revolutionizing customer engagement. And imagine a support call or an agent leveraging Copilot and the calls app, and or using the Copilot to do a resolution faster. So for example, I'm an agent taking a customer call, and after a few minutes I'm listening and I really don't quite understand what the issue is and how to debug the situation. I might use Copilot to suggest questions so that I can ask the customer to get a broader understanding of what the customer is trying to say. And then maybe I still don't understand or can't help the customer. I might need to call in a teammate or engineer or IT professional. And so I could use our consult and transfer feature to contact that person and say, hey, here's the issue. Can you help this customer? And then we can just leverage Copilot and share the recap and the questions that Copilot had summarized in the original call. And the engineer would have full context of what was happening, which would eliminate the customer's need to have to reiterate and tell their story again.
Brian, I'm a little curious about the design decisions that went into putting Copilot inside of Teams. A lot of conversational AI, and we all have familiarity, we see from the start with ChatGPT. it's a chat. It's a conversational dialogue, which of course is exactly the paradigm that many people use Teams for every single day when they chat with their colleagues. How did you think about how to separate the conversations that you're having with Copilot versus the conversations you're having with colleagues? Do you think these lines will be blurred over time, or are you actually thinking about them as quite a separate thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, and something I think we're all learning about as this technology is emerging and developing. But I think, fundamentally, we've approached it from a few different perspectives. The first is, Teams is a chat app. Hundreds of millions of people use Teams to chat all day long with their colleagues. So on one hand, it's so well suited to also chat with AI, right? And we wanted to leverage kind of the familiar mechanics and affordances that we're all accustomed to from using chat in our work to also chat with AI systems. So we thought that was like a very natural evolution of the product. But as you alluded to, that also can start to create some confusion or blur the lines between talking to people and talking to an AI system via Copilot. So for this first iteration, we were very intentional making sure that when you were talking to AI, it was very clear in terms of the UX affordances, the construct, creating a very consistent mechanic between what we see in meetings, in chat, and then also in the other Office apps. It's the same UX construct to engage with Copilot. So that was really important. And when we look at some of our responsible AI requirements as well, providing that transparency and intelligibility into how this system is working and when you're engaging with AI and when you're not engaging with AI was really, really key to how we kind of thought about that in general. You kind of hinted to the future and maybe do the lines start to blur. I could imagine that. I don't know where exactly things are going to go as AI systems start to become more integrated into workflows. But for these early days of kind of Copilot and these AI experiences, really trying to create a super clear delineation in our UX model and thinking was essential to how we approach things.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the paradigms I've seen in using Copilot myself is that it is generally today a Copilot for me, right? I'm able to ask it questions about meetings that I'm invited to or files that I already have access to. And that's really important for, privacy and permissions to stay intact. But I am curious how you're thinking about attribution. In other words, when I use AI or Copilot in this case to do something, should the other people that I'm interacting with have some right to know that? If, Wendy, maybe I'll start with you. If I'm on a call with somebody and I'm using AI to, augment my experience in that call, how much should the person on the other end really be able to know that? Have we made any, sort of decisions, or do we have any ideas around attribution?
That's a great question. I'm going to defer to Alice on that one because we're not figuring what they're doing.
Of course. You actually raised a really, really good question, Derek. And it actually came up in our early responsible AI reviews in that, do we want a group of people to know that AI is present in their conversation, in their chat, right? Today, we do have some indication in that transcription or recording is running the meeting, so people can kind of know that their conversation is being recorded, and people with Copilot access can use that to generate responses, right? The explosion we're thinking right now is how can we visually indicate to people that Copilot is also being used in the meeting? Is that something that people will promote collaboration? Would that be something that give people transparency on how AI is being used in a group setting? So we're going through that design thinking right now. We'll share that very soon.
Fascinating. And Ryan, what about you? Have you thought through any of this on the chat side?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting to see how the kind of user behaviors have evolved, since ChatGPT kind of broke onto the scene. The screenshot has kind of become this universal method of sharing what you're experiencing with these AI systems. We see it, all over the internet, people taking screenshots of their ChatGPT interactions, their Bing chat interactions. And then we see that internally at Microsoft as we've been previewing all these experiences. People take a screenshot of what they see from Copilot and they drop it into the chat or they drop it into the document. So there's definitely this kind of tendency to want to share your experience, right, with your collaborators, even if they haven't had it directly themselves. So I think for us, it's about kind of leaning into that user behavior that we're seeing to both kind of facilitate the engagement that folks have with the system, but then also provide that transparency. At the end of the day, Copilot is a tool that you can use just like any other tool in your system to get your job done. So I don't feel like there's necessarily a like ethical requirement to say, hey, I'm using Copilot to summarize this chat. I think it's more a delight aspect, right? That's like, hey, look at this cool thing that I just did. Come check it out and we'll accelerate our collaboration.
Yeah. And then add to that, there's one example that we are hearing from customers in that they're often copying the notes from Copilot into chats, right? And oftentimes they would manually add, this is created by Copilot or this is created by AI. So we're thinking about experiences where we can just make that easier for people in that just adding that tagline into the copy output, right? That people don't have to do that manual thing anymore.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like, I know, Derek, and I think you and I joked about this a couple of weeks ago, how these types of tools are going to change our behavior. I think I joked with you, like, I leave typos in my like writing sometimes to like say, hey, I actually wrote this, because, the outputs from these systems are like so perfect and like overly polished sometimes. So I think that how our behaviors are going to be influenced by these systems is going to be really interesting over as we get more and more usage.
Yeah, and I think on the attribution stuff, I mean, it's also interesting to think about the threshold at which we would want to fully attribute it to Copilot. So if I'm generating an email and I end up editing 30, 40% of what Copilot provided me, which still, by the way, is super valuable. I still had a starting point. Should that still be, say, generated by Copilot, or like, am I in, somewhere in that too? And so I think there's really interesting questions when you're not just taking like what Alice described, which is like, here's the notes, boom, enjoy, and let's decide if we think they're right, but more you're using it actually before you actually, commit something, before you click send on an email, before you click send on a chat. That feels more like it's mine, and something I have control over, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I will add, one thing that's been really important to us is to ensure that there is, a human in the loop from when you get an output from the system and you start to share it, that there is kind of this manual step that you go through, because ultimately, you as the individual user are responsible for how you're using this content, how you're using this material. So I think, it's about finding this right balance between like over automating, making sure there's still like human in the loop, that is responsible for the output from these systems. And that's been really key to how we've approached kind of the whole Copilot design.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what you're probably getting at a little bit is, of course, hallucination, and making sure that, we're also just guarding against, having factual inaccuracies and things like that. What are some of the steps that you're taking, with your product teams to solve for hallucination, or at least try to minimize it? Obviously, and I think we've said from the beginning, these things still will make mistakes. We should accept that. Hopefully not, over time it gets less and less. But what are some of the things you're doing to sort of reduce the risk of hallucination? And maybe go around and see if there's any thoughts from each of you on that.
I can start for meetings. For meetings, we made an explicit choice to make sure that the grounding context for Copilot is only on what's said in the meeting. And that right now today is transcript. It will not answer questions that's not mentioned in the meeting at all. It will actually refuse to answer. So we made it so that everything that we want Copilot to help you with is related to the productivity and collaboration for the meeting. And then we obviously want to many iterations of prompt engineering to make sure that the answers we do provide is as accurate as it can be. Of course, there's still going to be inaccuracies, and that's where the attribution comes into play to let people know that this is generated by AI, and sometimes there could be mistakes. So that's one aspect. Now I'll hand off to Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, we've taken a very similar approach on the chat side. It's a little bit easier on chat because the messages are already there. You don't have to go through the transcription step. But it's all been about our prompt engineering techniques and really ensuring that the responses stay grounded in the content of the chat conversation, similar to the way Alice described with meetings, and that's been essential. And then one thing we added to the chat experience is the ability to look up where a given kind of takeaway or highlight or summary is coming from within the chat. So you can actually get a little link and jump to that part, that specific message, to see what the source was. You can actually start to verify it. But what's amazing is we started to explore what these citations or references is. If you get a highlight or a takeaway in your summary, you can maybe have 2 or 3 references. And when you go and explore them, we'll actually take you to very different parts of the conversation. And it shows you how sophisticated these systems are to assemble different messages. And when you read them, you're like, oh yeah, this is the story of this takeaway. And it actually gives you like a new insight into how this conversation has taken shape. So it's also kind of a discovery tool as well, as we're starting to see this like emergent behavior.
It is really interesting when you do have everything come up in the notes and how accurate it can be. But it just goes back to the point of we still need human beings reading this stuff and being like, was this correct? Is this right? Is this what so-and-so said? So, it's still learning. But
And I think just on that point, Wendy, and this is kind of my mental model when I think about like factuality, is the models make mistakes like humans do, right? If you are sitting in a meeting and trying to take notes and listen to it, you're going to make a mistake or maybe think one person said something, but it's really somebody else. So I think you have to come to it with a very kind of almost human-like view. And once you adjust your mental model to be like, oh yeah, this is a system which is fallible, and in a similar way to like a human note taker would be, you really start to accept some of that and really understand where do you need to pay attention, right? If there was a really complicated part of this chat or this meeting, like, okay, let me double check that, right? In the same way you would if you had some, an individual taking notes.
I think we forget sometimes too, it's not only the large language model as a potential point of failure, it's also the quality of the transcription, which relies on, how good is the person's mic that's speaking, do they have a thick accent? Is this Margaret Thatcher on the call? That sort of thing. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out. But obviously one of these things that hopefully over time just gets better and better. I am a little curious, as we start to roll out Copilot to larger and larger groups of customers in the wild, right? And we're starting the early access program, we're ramping up quite significantly. As product makers, what are going to be some of the signals you're really looking for to really understand whether or not we're being successful with Copilot? So how do you sort of measure success? Alice, we start with you.
Yeah. So I think in general, as a person, I tend to be on the more conservative side on all these new innovations, right? So I think I approach this with a lot of caution in that we want to build a product that is truly useful, that's sticky in usage for users, right? Rather than, oh, here's a really awesome product that is using the latest tech that people might use for a couple of weeks. So the thing that's very valuable for me is not only the positive feedback that we're hearing from customers from day to day, but also their usage pattern. Like, are they coming back to the product day by day, week by week, over a long period of time, right? We're very, very early in the journey in that we've only launched since March, so it's only been 3-4 months of usage so far. I would love to see continued usage over years.
Yeah, and Wendy, what about you?
Definitely through engagement. That will be one of the ways we'll be analyzing success, how frequently it's used. Like Alice said, we don't want it to be a novelty, just have somebody use it once and be like, okay, move on. So measuring, the engagement, and also measuring the feedback. We'll have a tool that will prompt you like the thumbs up, thumbs down, and we want lots of thumbs up, hopefully.
Ryan, I'm curious for you what success looks like, because obviously you have within your sort of scope, not just the local sort of chat experience of Copilot within Teams chats as an example, but also you're looking after sort of the cross-app experience and how it manifests in Teams, which allows you to ask much more general questions around your files, your calendar, and things like that. So do you look at success very similar for both of those things? And is it similar to Alice and Wendy just talked about, which is just engagement and sort of ongoing use?
Yeah, I think, practically Alice and I shared the same OKR. So, yeah, we look at things similarly, but it's really about that kind of long-term usage. Are people coming back to the experience? I do think that the kind of local sidecar experience, as we refer to it, so your in-chat experience, is a very precise tool that we expect to see like high-frequency usage as you're engaging with your chats throughout the day. And then the kind of global Copilot that's over all of your documents is probably more kind of a specialized use case that maybe you're not going to engage with as high frequency, but it's more like, okay, I'm working on this big project, produce a summary on this topic, right? And then turn it into a Word document is one of kind of the murky use cases. So I think we'll see differences in maybe intensity, but it's really all about that long-term retention and really being very conscious of the kind of novelty effect of these tools, right? And saying, yeah, we're going to get a lot of users at the beginning, but do they come back? Do they stick around? And that to us is the most important indicator of delivering real value.
So as we start to wrap up, I'm just curious at a final question, and any of you can answer this if you have thoughts. Where do you think this technology goes? And I'm not asking you specifically for what's on our roadmap, but more just generally speaking of you've been playing with this technology for most of its life, which is not to say a long time, by the way. But I'm curious, if you have thoughts around some of the broader applications of the way in which this might actually change the way we all work for the long term. Any thoughts?
I can take a stab at it. So right now, we know Copilot does a pretty good job generating text-based. Like if you ask it to generate notes, action items, it does an amazing job. We've all seen that. My biggest question is, how are people using those insights afterwards, right? It's great I have a list of 7 action items, but are people taking actions on it? Are they following through with it? Is it actually helping them increasing their productivity or collaboration with others, right? So where I want to see Copilot grow is to convert some of those insights into easy to do actions so that we also help people do those things so that they don't have to feel overburdened with, I have 7 things that Copilot told me to do, I have to go follow up on it. But how can Copilot help them accomplish those things easier would be where I would love to see the product grows into.
I think for me, I'm really starting to think broadly about the B2C experiences, not just how we're using it within teams, but also outside of teams. For example, how would you push notes to a CRM system or something like that? Make it easier for customers to do their jobs.
Kind of extending the idea that Alice was alluding to, and we kind of mentioned off the top. I do think in the not so distant future, collaborating with an AI system throughout your day, as you're working with colleagues, working on a task, brainstorming, will become a very natural thing. And I think I will not be surprised to see Copilot evolving in that fashion and just become this thing that's with you all day long that you're working with as you go about your tasks. And I mean, that's an abstract notion perhaps, but I think it's closer than it might feel, and I think really exciting.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of interesting behavior shifts that we are expecting to see as well. Right now, if we all have confidence in Copilot taking notes for us, effectively, none of us have to go manually take notes anymore, right? And more of our time will be spent on just talking to each other, not having to worry about the manual stuff. So how do we see people changing their behavior in meetings, in chats, because we have this tool available is also very interesting for us to observe and kind of see where can we go next.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've certainly observed that I think is most powerful is that I don't have to start any work by already starting to think about the structure. I'm able to just say a bunch of things in an unstructured way in a meeting, or I'm able to write a bunch of thoughts down in a very unstructured way. And now I have sort of something that's going to organize it and start to pull it together. And I find that actually unlocks a little more creativity. It's in a way, it's like the way kids think. They don't think about the constraints of, well, this needs to be a Word doc, and I'm going to need to have a format. Like they just start doing stuff. And I think there's something really interesting about bringing work back to that point where we get to just sort of shed our thoughts and use our brain, and then have something that's going to help and provide sort of an organizing layer on that. Which we'll see how it goes. But
bring the fun back into work.
That's right. Well, that's a great place to end. So for all of the updates and the announcements we made this week at Inspire, please follow the link on the screen to learn more. I want to thank you so much for watching today. And thank you, Alice, Wendy, and Ryan, for the great conversation around Copilot. It's really exciting to see all the great work that's happening. And thanks again for your time.